This learning module is complicated. It's got a lot of different moving parts. So I'm going to break it down into separate videos. The first video is about language standardization that was imposed or created, if you will, by the government. I'd like to start by sort of pulling back away from Japan and looking at East Asia in general and language standardization moves and changes that happened across platforms, if you will, amongst different languages. Here's a timeline that I put together to show different events in recent history that have to do with language simplification. So I've called it language simplification in CJK for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. So you see in this timeline that there were quite a number of different events. I've included China and I've included Japan. And I'm going to give myself a little bit of a highlighter here so we can look at the important parts. In the case of Japan, in 1946, Toyo kanji, which I'm going to say more about in just a minute, was established. Initially there were 1,850 of these characters, of these kanji. Also in 1946, we see the new orthography implemented by the government. I'll be saying more about that in a later video. In 1948, the Japanese introduced the concept of the elementary kanji, in other words, kanji that elementary school students are expected to know. By the time they graduate from 6th grade, they should know those kanji. In 1951, the Japanese introduced standard name characters, characters that could be used that were in essence legal to be used when you were naming a child. I'll be addressing that in greater detail when we get to the biography unit, the biography learning module. In 1969, the Japanese introduced the revised list of elementary kanji. And in 1977, they revised that list again. In 1981, they changed the term that they used for that list from Toyo kanji here to Joyo kanji. And finally, in 1989, they revised the list yet again. So this is a list of standard kanji that the Japanese educational system recommends all students know, and it's divided up by grade level. Nelson's dictionary also lists these characters divided up by the specific grade level, in case you're interested in one of the appendices. So that's sort of the big picture. You see what's happening in China at the same time is that China is proposing a simplified system of characters. And also later on, that scheme, a more simplified scheme, is implemented. And there is some reform in China also, or sorry, in Korea also. So let me start in this video with that linguistic standardization. In 1923, the Ministry of Education specified 1,962 kanji and 154 simplified kanji for standard use, and they called that set, as in a mathematical set, Toyo kanji, kanji that are used in general. In 1931, that list was revised, and instead of having 1,962 characters, it had 858 characters. In 1942, we're really getting into the top of the war for Japan, 1,134 characters were specified as standard so-called Toyo kanji, and 1,320 characters as sub-Toyo kanji, in an effort to educate people and standardize education. In 1946, right after the war, there were an awful lot of changes thanks to the American occupation, and education was also one of the areas that was significantly altered. In 1946, the ministry removed 88 characters from the list, but added 249 for a total of 1,295 standard characters. That list was not adopted until later the same year, when the number of characters was up to 1,850. Of those 1,850, 881 of them were expected to be learned by the end of elementary school, and in the case of Japan, that means by the end of 6th grade. In 1981, the list was revised to have 1,945 characters, and they changed what they called it, as I mentioned earlier, from the Toyo kanji to the Joyo kanji. This is the term that's still used today. So what other changes happened in 1981? Just to give you an example, I'm certainly not going to expect you to memorize this, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see some of the characters that were added to the list. You might even recognize a few of these. I'm kind of surprised some of them weren't on the list initially. How do they not get on the list? Like this one is kutsu, shoes. I don't know, a shoe is a pretty basic thing. We wear shoes almost every day. How come that wasn't on the list? I'm not really sure. Or this one down here, Tatsu, dragon. That's one of the important zodiac signs. Not really sure how that one wasn't on the list in the first place. Shiru as in misashiro, right? Soup, that's an important one. Saru, monkey. There's all kinds of characters here. One more I'll just point out. Sara, a dish. For some reason these weren't initially on that list, but then they were added. Here's some other changes that happened in 1981. One kanji had its official appearance changed. This character, which stands for a lantern, its onyomi is to, was changed to this. Now, that looks like a simplification, but actually it wasn't. And this is an anomaly. I don't know of any other character whose official appearance was changed like this. It's different than the sort of simplification that we're going to be seeing in the next video. So when you're in Japan, if you look at something that was printed prior to 1981 and it has this character, you'll see the more complex version of it, and if it was printed after 1981, then you'll see that version of it. Here's some other changes that happened. The following readings were added as acceptable: the reading of Haeru for this kanji, the reading of Ayabumu for this, the reading of Iko for this kanji here, the reading of Kaoru for this one, etc. So these were readings that were not official, but then later became official under the 1981 guidelines. And there was a reading that was deleted. This one, the official reading of Hara, was deleted. It's not official anymore. People might still read it that way, but it was deleted. And Mekura, which means blind. I feel kind of sad about that one being eliminated. That's a word that shows up in Natsume Soseki's novels, for example, from the Meiji period. But when we get into the later 20th century, people stopped using that reading and started using other readings. And so officially, the Ministry of Education eliminated that as a reading. So that's a really quick overview of the language reform as implemented by the Ministry of Education in Japan. In the next video, we're going to look at the simplification of kanji.